All right. Welcome and aloha to Kalihi Union Church tonight. To all of you wonderful smiling faces in the sanctuary today. And of course, we send our biggest love and aloha to Pastor Jonathan, who always opens up his heart and his home to us, so we appreciate that. And of course, aloha to all you viewers who are watching us live. And thank you for your patience. As I mentioned to everybody who was going to sign in live, that we never have any control over streaming issues, and one of the things we learned through COVID, right, is that we've got to be very patient, because the Lord likes to stretch us and grow us and mold us, and that normally means that we spend a lot of time in prayer. So thank you for your patience. Well, I'm Eva Andrade, and I am the president and CEO of Hawaii Family Forum, and I've been with Hawaii Family Forum since 2001. And I like to mention this because a lot of people may not know that Hawaii Family Forum is going to be celebrating 25 years in the community next year. So we're going to be continuing to partner with faith-based churches, pastors like Pastor Jonathan, because what we want to do is we want to take the passion that each person has to make Hawaii a beautiful state, held deeply in the hand of the Lord Jesus, because that's what we believe. We believe that this land was made for us, and we're part of it, and we have a duty and a responsibility to raise our voice. So thank you all very much. So what we're going to do tonight is, very simply, we're going to have two main speakers, and that'll be Jim Hochberg and Susan Duffy, and they're going to give you everything you've ever wanted to know about public education in the state of Hawaii and what's happening and how to plug in. And then Jim is also going to be plugging into the Constitution so that you can kind of see where the foundation for all this comes from. And then at the very end, I'm going to come back and I'm going to be the cheerleader. So I don't want to waste any more time on anything that's happening tonight. So I want to welcome Susan Duffy, who's going to give you everything that you want to know about the public school system here in Hawaii and how to plug in. So Susan Duffy.
Okay, and how do I do just the... Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all. Tonight, I'm going to give you a short presentation on what happens to be one of the latest topics in education today, and one that is causing great concern among some parents, teachers, policymakers, and think tanks. And the topic is social emotional learning, or SEL. And how many of you have heard of SEL before? Okay, and how many of you are educators or in the, okay? All right, that's good. I just like to see who I'm talking to. So let me get to my outline. There we go. Okay, so I think it's good to have an outline so you know where I'm gonna go. I'm gonna be using quite a few slides tonight, and I'm gonna suggest to you tonight that SEL is a bait and switch. I will close by offering some practical suggestions that you can do to protect your kids, and then I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Attorney Jim Hochberg, who will talk to you about your rights as parents and citizens. Okay, we need to start with a definition of terms, particularly these days, because the meaning of words can be distorted, and they can also be used to hide their real meaning. And we're also seeing a lot of nonsensical terms that are being used in our culture today. So we're going to start with the definition of SEL, and then we're going to discuss why it's important, and then we're going to get into some of the background of SEL, because we really can't talk about SEL without talking about the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, which is CASEL, and CASEL is the go-to organization when it comes to SEL. Now, I'm going to get into the original definition of SEL in a minute, but I want to set the table for how it is that I got involved in all of this to begin with, because I'm sure you're wondering, why am I talking to you about this topic? I'm the president of the Pearson Foundation of Hawaii. We have a pregnancy center in downtown Honolulu. What does this have to do with SEL? Well, in many parts of the country, pregnancy centers like ours are also able to go into the schools and provide sex education. These days it's called relationship education. And these programs are designed to essentially encourage young people to make good, sensible decisions regarding sex and relationships. Because at the end of the day, we all know that strong relationships and healthy decisions make for successful families and for healthy lives. But we don't do that here in our state, and that's a separate topic for a different conversation. Now, Planned Parenthood also provides sex education, and they put them in the schools all over the country, and they like this program, or this comprehensive sexuality education is what they call it. So I'm telling you all this because my primary research focus has been CSE, Comprehensive Sexuality Education, and I've been involved in trying to help others provide alternatives to this. CSE programs are in Hawaii schools. They are listed on the DOE website, and only very recently did I discover that there's a relationship between CSE and SEL, particularly as it relates to gender ideology, and that's why I'm here presenting this tonight. So this presentation is not about CSE, but I'm going to use it to set the table because I see it and I look at it as if they're using the same playbook to get these into the schools. So let's talk about CSE for a little bit first. Planned Parenthood says that they're the nation's #1 provider for sex ed. They like CSE programs. In Hawaii, they can also get in under interpersonal violence or violence prevention classes. So if you go to the website and you look under sex ed, you can also see a category for interpersonal relations, and they also use some of those programs for that. And schools here in Hawaii are supposed to provide transparency about what particular program they're using, and it should be posted on the website prior to teaching it. And good teachers do usually tell the parents what they're doing. But you should know that CSE has a number of highly controversial components which can be harmful for children, and that is why parents need to be warned. It's a rights-based approach to sex ed and includes gender ideology. CSE programs suggest that children can choose their gender. They teach children about sex, sexuality, and sexual pleasure as early as age 5. Sexual pleasure and promiscuity are seen as rights. And a lot of these programs have graphic, sexual, pornographic content in them, or else they link to them. So if you would like to see what some of that looks like, I would suggest you go to amaze.org and look at some of their videos. They confuse children about their bodies. In my spare time, I'm part of a network called Protect Child Health Coalition that partners to create the tools and resources to protect kids from CSE. But it's a bit like playing whack-a-mole because every time you analyze a curriculum, another one comes in, or they have to update the one that you've just analyzed because there's another thing that has to be inserted into the program. They also hide the material by hiding behind copyright laws. And then the way technology is today, all sorts of things can be put online that can be hidden from parents. And sometimes you need a passcode to go in and actually look at the curriculum. There are even programs that are equipped to help kids hide their search history. And I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but the CDC is currently promoting an online chat space for teens to discuss, without parental oversight, things like LGBT issues, dealing with difficult family members, or finding an alternative family. Recently, I had a colleague in my group say that they were going to shift the focus on CSE in their state and they were going to look at SEL. And the reason was, she said, that it was a bigger threat. So she brought in somebody to give us a briefing on it. It was a lot of information. It was information overload. And I didn't get it at first, and I myself had to go and research it. And then I'm here to tell you, I think she's right. CSE is going to come into the schools under the banner of SEL. And there's no way that children are not going to be exposed to it, particularly the gender ideology portion of it. There will be no way to opt out. So while parents will be able to opt out of a specific sex ed curriculum, they will not escape this type of indoctrination. And that, again, is why I'm here to talk to you. The people that are pushing SEL are the same that push the CSE to get into the schools. And so I'm just going to list a few things that I noticed before we get into the actual slides here. First of all, the government is using a problem to bring in the solution. And sometimes they help to create the problem, and then they want to bring in the solution. Both are driven from the top down, right? It's not a grassroots movement. It's not organic. You don't have people running into the BOE saying, we want more sex ed. We want CSE. You just don't see that. It's top down. Federal funds are used to get both into the schools, and with federal dollars, there are always strings attached. Millions of dollars will be changing hands among some wealthy philanthropists like Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, same government agencies, Department of Ed, Department of Health, bureaucrats, and all sorts of nonprofits. Both make dubious claims. CSE advocates claim that they're the only answer to reduce teen pregnancy. Never mind that teen pregnancy rates have been going down for years, and I think it was in 2015 they were at all-time historic lows. They claim to provide age and medically accurate material, and that's not necessarily true either. SEL proponents claim that they can help students achieve greater academic achievement and personal fulfillment, but the actual evidence is unpersuasive. And I'm not saying this. This is from organizations like the Pioneer Institute who have evaluated the research. CSE and SEL both use legislation and executive orders that are perfectly aligned so that once the legislation goes into effect or the federal dollars are accepted, whichever one comes first, they're able to go full throttle implementation. Both use similar vocabulary phrases like social justice, rights, equity, culturally relevant, culturally responsive, evidence-based. It's all boilerplate, so you could fill in the blank. You could say, blank aims to give students knowledge, attitude, skills, and values to whatever, make goals. Both of these programs have nationally recognized go-to organizations that help push their programs into the states using federal dollars. So there's an organization called the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States, better known as SECUS. So SECUS is for CSE what CASEL is for SEL. SECUS was started by Mary Calderon, who was a medical director for Planned Parenthood, and so it's supposed to be about health, right? They were always concerned about the health of young people. But something must have changed because really it's always been about some sort of a push for an agenda, but in 2019, they issued a press release to change their direction. And they said that sex ed is now for social change. So it's always been about social change. It's just that they're being more transparent about it. So if you go to the SECUS website today, you're going to see sex ed for social change. Now, according to SECUS, social change includes reproductive rights, LGBTQ equality, sexual violence protection, gender equity, and dismantling white supremacy. So, again, I'm going to get into CASEL later, but just know that there's two things that can push it. And both of them have elements of gender ideology in their programs and curricula which ignore biology and insist that the sexes are interchangeable, that a boy can become a girl and that a girl can become a boy, and this is simply not true. Both have advocates and organized opposition to mock or bully anyone who dares to point out the difference when they can't make reasoned arguments for their position. So I don't know if anybody's seen the documentary by Matt Walsh of What is a Woman, but that should give you an idea. And both of them use children, and both of them use the power of the state. And they also use corporations. So Target was selling chest binders and non-gendered swimwear in its stores and online this year in June. So the gender ideology piece is already making children vulnerable to abuse. We're seeing the irreversible damage being done by medical professionals, therapists, counselors, and even school officials who are all playing their role in affirming the trans identities of confused young people. Children that are being rushed into medical transition are going to bear the physical and mental scars of these medical issues for the rest of their lives. Clinics have sprung up all over the country that mutilate children. Girls as young as 13 years old are getting double mastectomies. So here's the bottom line. SEL and CSE are both being used to redefine normal. Both seek to undermine the family and change societal norms regarding sex and gender. So if you go to this DOE website, you're going to see a lot of references to SEL, and it's the number two priority for them. So this slide just shows you the amount of money that was given to schools under COVID. $190 billion. Millions of dollars are coming into Hawaii's DOE with strings attached because a large portion of the ESSER money is to be dedicated to mitigate learning loss as a result of the shutdown. So rest assured that partners or education partners of SEL are going to get their share of those funds to help districts mitigate learning loss through evidence-based interventions. So that's where you can find the fiscal plan. That's the ESSER 3 money. So the money came in 3 parts. So we're now on ESSER 3. So that's $412.3 million. Oops. Go back. All right, and there's shows you 23% of the $412.3 million has to go to mitigating learning loss in schools. Okay. There's my slide. I lost my slides. On this slide. I can keep going without it. So I'm going to give you the definition of SEL, and that is I'm sure I'm pressing the right button here. I can go back. Okay, let me give you the definition. Okay, and this is what they're saying, okay, so I'm going to just read it directly. But it's the process of developing self-awareness, self-control, and interpersonal skills that are vital for school, work, and life success. It denotes a combination of what was once called character education and skills training, life skills training. It aims to teach students to manage emotions, set goals, show concern for others, and develop good relationships. So this is a no-brainer, and this is why it's really hard to get people excited about SEL, because you think, well, what's wrong with that? This is great, this is wonderful. Who can argue with it? Now you have to understand why it's important, okay? So there are elements that are outside factors that can inhibit a child's ability to learn or perform academically. So they could be for any number of reasons: a new baby in the house, mom and dad aren't getting along, maybe grandparents come and live, or maybe the child is just not good socially, maybe he has trouble fitting in. So any number of reasons could exist, and so as a teacher you'd want to take care of those, right, so that you could help the child learn academically. So imagine a student who is frustrated with math and has a meltdown in class. Well, he or she can't learn because they're upset, and neither can anybody else in the classroom, so you want to take the child and you take them to the counselor and you'd help them that way. So now let me see if I can get to my, okay, there we go. Thank you. So this is the handbook's definition of SEL. I want you to take a look at this because notice the word programming in there. SLE programming involves implementing practices and policies that help children and adults because they want SEL for adults as well. Okay? This is very general language. Notice the emphasis on the words work and productivity. This sounds like it could come out of the World Economic Forum. And in case you didn't know, they are involved in the business of reimagining education. Okay, SEL comes before academics, which makes total sense. Because again, you want to be able to take care of the child's social emotional needs before learning. Now, proponents of SEL are calling for less focus on academics, and CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, believes that schools need to put more emphasis on student attributes: values, attitudes, mindsets, and beliefs. So I would remember those: values, attitudes, mindsets, and beliefs. The question is whose? Whose values, whose mindset, whose beliefs are we talking about? So in order to understand that, we'd probably want to look at the origins of SEL. So back in 1994, a group of educators met at the Fetzer Institute, and they wanted to create a framework for SEL in order to meet the students' non-academic needs. And they wanted SEL to be central to the mission of every school. And who was John Fetzer? Well, you need to look at the origins of something, right? So John Fetzer was a devout follower of the occultist Alice Bailey, and Bailey is known as the mother of the New Age movement. Fetzer was a businessman, an entrepreneur, and a Freemason. He was involved with psychics and pendulums and other occult practices to help him with his business decisions. And he was very successful, and he wanted to use his influence to elevate the consciousness of mankind. So it's significant to note that Fetzer has New Age spirituality roots. Okay, this is CASEL. You're going to see this a lot. So there is their logo, and then there's the wheel with the 5 competencies. So what you have to understand is that the original 1994 group that met at Fetzer morphed into CASEL. So that's where that comes from. So CASEL is the leading organization for advancing SEL throughout the country, and SEL is in every state. And on the slide, the wheel, you can see there's 5 competencies that make up SEL. So self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. Okay. CASEL is the leading organization for research, resources, and advocacy, and they claim that SEL can help with academics. But where's the evidence? And this is something really interesting to note. In 2016, CASEL announced that it had chosen 8 states to collaborate on creating the K-12 SEL standards. But within less than 2 months, 2 states dropped out, Tennessee and Georgia. And in Tennessee, there was a backlash of parents because they were criticizing the initiative, wondering why there's a national program telling their kids how they're supposed to feel. So CASEL provides the framework for those who develop the SEL programs, and on the bottom are the logos of some of the players that can be found in some of their training materials, and those are some of the same ones that are involved with comprehensive sex ed. Okay. Now I want to get into concept creep and transformative SEL. So I've just told you what SEL's original definition is, but just like CECUS in 2019, in 2020, something happened. Activists saw that they could take those 5 domains and they could use them for something called transformative SEL. And just as with CSE, where it was all supposed to be about health, and then it was rebranded Sex Ed for Social Change, we now have SEL promoting social justice using the 5 competencies. Okay. Now, so whenever you see the word equity as opposed to equality, think social justice. Transformative SEL is intended to promote equity and is anchored in the notion of justice-oriented citizenship. What is included in the notion of justice-oriented citizenship? Is it gender equity, dismantling white supremacy, global citizenship? At the end of the day, SEL is going to psychologically manipulate children. Education is going to be used to mold, assess your child's values, attitudes, mindsets, and beliefs, as opposed to focusing on academic content. And is SEL really the central mission of the school? And what about academics? There's just a whole lot of money and a whole lot of resources being dedicated to something that's very expensive and very time-consuming, with no evidence to suggest that it's going to improve academics. So just to give you a statistic of how bad things are. So before COVID, in 2019, 66% of 4th graders in the United States were not reading at grade level. And consider this, in 2019, 32 million people in the United States couldn't read above a 5th grade level. I mean, surely we can do better than this. Now, just yesterday, Hawaii Free Press had an article called "The Mental Health Pandemic for Youth," which will probably be used to push SEL. But one thing in the article they pointed out was that 72% of Hawaii 8th graders scored below proficient math levels. Okay, this is the whole child, and I want to put this slide here because this is where you get a lot of enthusiasm for SEL because it gets away from the high stakes testing that a lot of teachers had to deal with. But we need to pay attention to this because there's some truth in it. I mean, there's always a little bit of truth in this, right? There is a need for social emotional learning because of the disruptions over the past couple of years. And I did learn about a thing called COVID kids, and it did make sense. So if you think about it, and you had a preschooler in 2019 that was supposed to go to school, but then they didn't, and they had to wear a mask, and they were isolated from their peers, and they couldn't go out and do the normal things that kids do, and they learn by osmosis, they would have a little trouble when they came back into school, and so the teacher would have to deal with that. However, I do think that good teachers would just do that anyway. They would normally do that. You don't need the federal government infusing all kinds of money. So I put this slide in here because this is the whole school, whole community, whole child. And if you go to the CDC website, there's an interactive video there. So what they want is, they want the federal government getting involved in the whole school, whole community, whole child. But if you think about that, who gets to decide what's best for the child? They want school to do just about everything, to include health care services, so you could drop your child off before you went to work. You'd have after-school care, you'd have dental, you'd have everything. So it's very appealing to some people, right? But then just look at how you had to deal with the mask issue in Hawaii, like how much influence did parents have? Who really decided, right? So when you have the child belonging to the state, who makes the decisions? So this is why there are a lot of parents who are very upset about what's coming in under SEL because they say, that's my area, my family, we teach our children our values, our beliefs. Okay, this is a quote from Castle's CEO. She announced in December of 2020 that the definition and the framework for SEL was to be revised so as to highlight the value of SEL as a weapon for social justice. So now we emphasize students' identities, marginalization, just communities, and the collective as opposed to the individual. Okay, and SEL is political. It's about creating activists who will transform society. So I have a video in here I'm going to show you. If you're watching this online, you might not be able to see it because of streaming, so we'll just see how it goes here. Play. It's okay. Do you guys know about libs of TikTok or anything like that, or Twitter? You might want to follow them.
So
there you go.
Comment was put on a video that had absolutely nothing to do with politics, but let's dive in because teaching is political. The education system, the curriculum, school zoning, funding, standardized testing, all of these things can create and further lead to class and racial inequalities and impact life chances for our students. Especially as a history teacher, my students deserve somebody who is going to confront and challenge the injustices and untruths that are in our history that have led to discrimination. So yes, teaching is political because as we develop curriculum and have conversations with our students, equity and anti-racism need to be in the forefronts of our minds, as well as giving our kids the means to gather factual information and form their own opinion. But this is wildly different than indoctrination or propaganda because I'm not trying to sway my students' opinions. I want them to form their own educated opinions. What I'm doing is challenging a broken system and hopefully laying the groundwork for progress and justice. So this
okay.
was put on a video that
My next slide. So SEL is also about equity. SEL emphasizes students' identities above race. Everything is to be viewed through an equity lens. So transformative SEL is now about the guilt and the struggle. Who has power, who doesn't, who has privilege, who doesn't. If you're too pretty, you could have pretty privilege or lookism because you might get to lead the class to lunch, or you might get to say the poem in front of the parents or something. There's able-bodied privilege, because you can go outside and you don't have a disability and people don't look at you differently. There's hearing privilege, going to a lecture without the need of American Sign Language. And the US government's definition of family is called systemic familialism. Innocence is also a privilege, which needs to be done away with because not every child grows up with a family that wants to protect its innocent. Therefore, that's not fair, so no one gets to be innocent. It's about victim versus oppressor or predator versus prey. It's very negative and it's very depressing, and it offers no worldview with hope or joy for the future. Okay, again, it's about equity and social justice. Self-management is now a collective goal, and it's about practicing anti-racism, and self-awareness is navel-gazing about our biases. And remember that none of this has anything to do with making sure that your kid can read or that he can do math timetables in his head. So what specific SEL program, what are they going to do to benefit your kid academically? All right. Okay, SEL is going to be in every subject to include math because even math requires liberation. Here's a screenshot of a 5th grade curriculum that specifically asks student activists to make a commitment to change. Number 3 is, I commit to practicing pronouns and correcting myself every time. And number 2 is, I commit to learning about the history and leadership of Black trans. Okay, I've got another video, just a short one here.
I teach my elementary school students about gender identity. Learning about gender identity helps children develop critical social emotional skills such as self-awareness, social awareness, and respect. I teach my students that there's a whole spectrum of gender identities and that everyone, whatever their gender, deserves love and respect. Some people are girls, some are boys, some are both, some are neither. Gender is all about how we feel on the inside and how we express ourselves. The most important thing I teach my students is that it's our job to listen to and learn from people when they share with us who they are, and that we need to use the name and the pronouns that people ask us to use when we refer to them. Here are some of the books and tools that I found the most useful when teaching about gender identity.
Families marching 3 by 3, hurrah, hurrah. These papas are non-binary, they love each other so proudly, and they all go marching in the big hooray. Baby blue, pink, white represent transgender people, and black and brown represent the queer and trans people of color. We're all in this together.
This is one of my favorite graphics because it shows how SEL is like the overarching thing that's going to bring in all the other things. So you're going to get comprehensive sexuality education, critical race theory, gender ideology, all grades, all subjects, no one curriculum to opt out of, and all the while measuring your child's attitudes, values, mindsets, and beliefs. Okay, I'm going to show you the bait and switch of this. Okay, so on the left-hand side, you're going to see the individual domains, right? You have 5 domains, but they're focused on the individual responsibility. And then you go to the far right, and now we're not focusing on the individual anymore, we're focusing on the collective. Okay, and I have one more video, so I think this is my last one. We were going to focus on groupthink under this.
Stand if you feel like it, don't stand if you feel like it, say the words if you want, don't have to say the words. So my class decided to stand but not say the words. My room does not have a flag. It used to be there, but I took it down during COVID because it made me uncomfortable. And I packed it away and I don't know where, and I haven't found it yet. But my kid today goes, hey, it's kind of weird that we just stand and then, we say it to nothing. I tell this kid, we do have a flag in the class that you can pledge your allegiance to. And he looks around and he goes, oh, that one? The inclusive pride flag. I pledge allegiance to the queers.
Today is the first time our country has recognized Juneteenth.
So SEL is going to be about teaching your child how to feel, and this is why they're going to survey values, attitudes, mindsets, and beliefs. So I was on a Zoom phone call with Cynthia Bartlett, Moms for Liberty, and Deb Philman, who has a program called The Reason We Learn. And we talked about SEL and how can we explain to parents why this is so serious. And she does have the video online, and you can see that, and I'm sure we'll provide that for you later. But one of the things she said was that, children want to please. They want to please their parents. They want to please their teachers. They want to do what they're told. And they also have boundaries, right? And they learn over time, like who's a trusted adult, who isn't. Who am I supposed to be nice to? Who do I have to be careful of, right? So when you tell a child, you have to be nice to everybody, well, that's pretty, kids are pretty literal, right? So does that really mean everybody? Because one of the hardest things to teach children is that just because you're nice to someone doesn't mean that they're going to be nice back, and sometimes you have to have boundaries, right? What does it mean if you say, well, you must always put other people first? All the time? Can't you imagine kids just weaponizing this thing hey, I want to cut in front of you for lunch because you need to be nice to me and you have to put me first, right? Otherwise you're not a nice person. And so there's also questions that they ask that can cause kids to question things that they might not otherwise even think about. The doctor assigns you your sex at birth. And Deb said, really? Really? That's what the doctors do? Because my mom told me that I was a little girl. Right? Is my mom lying to me? Can I change my gender? Do I have privilege because I'm white or Asian? Or one of the survey questions is, do you have another trusted adult that you can talk to besides someone in your family? Should I? So some of these questions that they are asking the kids are putting things into their minds that they might not otherwise even think of. Okay, social justice groupthink is already here. In April, the HSTA had a social justice seminar for teachers. They had workshops on Transgender 101 and Transgender 102 for teachers, and they also had a workshop on how to build a GSA club in your school. Okay. How many of you saw Hawaii Free Press article about a couple of parents suing one of the schools over a white privilege attack here? The daughter claims that she was verbally and emotionally victimized. The lawsuit claims that she was humiliated in front of her peers. Basically, they wanted her to accept her white privilege, and that is the language of social justice. How many of you know that there's a DOE policy or guidance on support for transgendered students? You should probably look it up and read it. I did. You look under the definitions, and one of the first things is, under definitions, key terms, assigned sex at birth. That's just nonsense. That's just word salad. There's no such thing. We know that children have gender dysphoria. We know that. But assigned sex at birth is not right. You might also want to be aware of the fact that, somebody asked this question, there is a law here in Hawaii where a minor child can receive mental health counseling service without the knowledge or consent of their parents. And you will get the bill, but you won't know what it's about. It will say, to maintain the confidentiality, it'll be called Minor Initiated Mental Health Services. And I think Jim is going to get into some of these other bills about, like one that wanted to criminalize parents. And did you know that there was actually a bill for parental rights here in Hawaii in the last session? It didn't go anywhere. Okay, data mining. I love that slide. That's from courageisahabit.org. And this is how they're going to, they're just going to data mine your kids. They're going to measure their values, attitudes, and beliefs. And this slide shows Panorama. This company was co-founded by Merrick Garland's son-in-law, and Merrick Garland is the Attorney General of the United States. So they have 23,000 schools. Contracts are in 50 states. It's a multi-million-dollar company. The company gets the survey data and provides the feedback to the schools and educators to let them know how well they're accomplishing their SEL goals. So you have a private company collecting all kinds of data on your kids. And keep in mind that for the lower grades, the children are not filling these out, the teachers are. And we know that there are nursery school kids that are nonverbal where teachers are filling out the forms. Okay, your children are given surveys with leading and biased questions, then it's collected and interpreted through an equity lens. Feedback is provided to the educators so that they know where they need to work on their students. Who's behind SEL? Whoop, back. Okay, it's the usual suspects. Okay, you have Bill and Melinda Gates, Nova Foundation, that's Warren Buffett, the World Economic Forum, same people, or same. Okay, so what's the end game? The end game is to destabilize and to destroy. Under this, children will be so jaded and so confused that they'll be unsure of who they are. And this is going to put them in conflict with their family and their faith, because in this new world that we're living in, that they're seeing, there is no truth and there is no norm. And that's what they want. Because by destabilizing and destroying the nuclear family, they can get rid of all cultural norms. And the family, as we know, is the foundation of civilization. And this slide is particularly sad. This is someone who's had a double mastectomy. And you can see that they have actually left the nipples there. They're not doing that anymore. So what can you do? Okay, there's a funny phenomenon in Hawaii. If you ask people about the public schools, they'll say they're terrible. But if you ask a parent about their child's specific school, the answer is far likely to be more positive. And the disconnect comes in part because there are great schools and there are dedicated teachers that can be found in every neighborhood on every island. But if it were me, and I had school-aged children, and having watched this for many years, and knowing and seeing what I see day after day, I would pull my kids out of government schools. Look at the academic scores for your school on the DOE website. They're not that good. And there's no need to take my word for it on any of this SEL stuff. You can research it for yourself. There are a lot of papers that are online about what's going on. There are podcasts on YouTube. There are average people, many of them are moms that have spent hours and hours researching what's going on in our nation's schools. You just have to be a critical thinker and look at the evidence of the claims that are being made. They cite all these studies about SEL, but again, where's the actual evidence? Because if you think about it, yes, we have had some trauma. We had trauma after 9/11. We didn't have SEL in the school. You know, we've had World War I and World War II. We've had the Vietnam. We've had so many things, and somehow we got through school and we didn't have all this. I wouldn't participate in any pronoun rituals. I would find out if the school is starting a GSA club. They're already in some of the high schools. They are targeting middle schools. Ilima Intermediate had the first one for Hawaii for a middle school, and they received the Gelson 2020 GSA Club of the Year. And remember, I told you that HSTA had a workshop on how to start these in your school. See if your school has a gender-affirming closet. Those are for kids who don't feel comfortable wearing their gender-affirming clothes at home. And believe it or not, there are schools that are getting grants, some as much as $10,000 to create these closets on their campus. You should support the people that are trying to help you and inform you. Join Moms for Liberty, that's Cynthia's group. Mothers and Fathers for Children is another nonprofit. You can sign up for them on Facebook. And then this HawaiiFamilyForum. Find out where your local candidate running for office stands, and then vote for the people that share your values. Okay, here's a website. I think this is fabulous. This was created to help and educate informed parents. And this is going to be a one-stop landing page for all parents. So you're going to find opt-out surveys here and other things that you need, you know, and it will be a work in progress, I'm sure. Other states have something like this. We didn't, so it's good that we finally have one. Okay, so that's kind of what the site looks like. Okay. And then I want to promote this movie, Mind Polluters. Some of the people that I work with are actually in this documentary, but I think this movie should be seen by every parent, every pastor, every person that's running for office, or anybody who cares about kids, because this documentary goes into a lot more detail than I can. And it's showing for free on Sunday, August 14th from 6:30 to 8:30 at 511 Main Street. And otherwise, you can just go to Vimeo and you can download it and watch it for $25. So I want to close with one positive thing, because I know that there are parents and there are people out there that are already struggling. They may have a child that has trans issues, or they're confused about their gender, or they're wondering, or they're struggling. And so I wanted to close with something positive, because one of my colleagues just came out with a book last Monday, and I want to show this little video here, because there is help. And there is hope. This is a social contagion that's running rampant in our society, and a lot of these kids are just getting caught up in it. But there are people out there right now that are working very hard to turn this around and help. So I want to plug the Advocates Protecting Children site for anybody who needs that, because they are very good at helping anybody who asks. They serve and support churches, schools, organizations, and families, and they give you the guidance on how to fight back against this ideology. So just let me close with this video, and then maybe, and then I'll turn it over to Jim. Everything that I gave you today was helpful, and thank you so much for coming out to listen to me today. And I will turn it over to Jim. And the QR code, you can go to the QR code to get copies of the slides. Yes? Yep. Eva's much more technically competent than I am, so thank you.
I know that was like drinking from a water hose, so we are going to do questions later, so please, if you have questions, hold on, and at the end we will do that. We're going to take just a 2-minute break while Jim gets his things settled, but, I just want to really emphasize something that Susan said. We are fully aware that there are absolutely fantastic teachers in the public school system too. We are not saying that all teachers are bad and that there's all these people that are meeting secretly underground and they want to do bad things. What we are saying is that it's the responsibility for every parent to know what is being taught in the school. They've got to sit down with their kids and look through the materials, ask questions, and keep very positive relationships with the teachers. So, 2-minute break, and then we will be back with Jim Hochberg.
Can we test the mic while we're on break? Can we test the mic? Is that good? Okay, thank you. Okay, are we ready? Somebody wave at me when we're ready to be back in the control booth. Somebody wave. Ready? Okay. My name is Jim Hochberg. I am an attorney here in Honolulu. I got licensed in 1984, and along the way, I hooked up with the Rutherford Institute and Alliance Defending Freedom and some other mainland sort of legal charities that do pro bono legal work. So I've done a lot of legal work in Hawaii on behalf of religious belief discrimination, voting things, Second Amendment things, a bunch of that kind of stuff. And so I'm very happy to be here to share this with you, and I love the way that Susan understands all of this really thick, deep stuff. This is the second time I've seen her do the presentation. I talked with her a whole bunch before we did the first presentation, and I still struggle to keep up with her. So I'm sure you probably do too. And one thing I want you to do is don't get overwhelmed with all that substance. Kind of keep it in your mind and know that she's available. The people that she showed you at the end there, I think it was APC, are available. Don't give up because it's so thick. They make it thick on purpose. Don't get scared away. So I am also the president of Hawaii Family Forum, which works alongside Hawaii Family Advocates works alongside Hawaii Family Forum. That's pretty funny. And so even I do a lot of presentations in churches on a lot of different subjects over many, many years, I think even more than 10 years or something. So if you have a church, and thank you very much, Pastor Steeper, for opening up your place here to let us do this, and you want this or a different kind of presentation, hopefully Eva can give you a quickie on that when she does her part. We love to do it, and we don't charge, and just to get the people of the Lord knowledgeable, because you got to have a vision. You got to know how to protect your family. The spiritual warfare thing isn't just a bunch of words anymore. It's not a concept somebody wrote about 50 years ago, 100 years ago. It is moment by moment, every single day. It's crazy. And so what I want to do is share with you a little bit of a Alliance Defending Freedom thing that is available online at adflegal.org. It's called the Parents Toolkit for Critical Theory. I've taken it and expanded a little bit, but if you want to get their tightly packed thing, you can go to adflegal.org. It's a handbook. You can print it out, pass it around, whatever you want to do. I'm not specifically doing this affiliated with Alliance Defending Freedom. I'm doing this as a private attorney, but I'm using their stuff that they gave me, and I do a lot of cases with them and stuff. So I just don't want anybody to think somehow I'm an Alliance Defending Freedom employee, because I never have been, but I work with them a lot all the time. So the context of what we're talking about changed radically from the founding era to today. But I want us to go back to what that foundation is, and we're going to walk through stuff to figure out what the process is. My role tonight is to help you understand, in the state of Hawaii, in the public school system, whether you're a parent of a public school child or not. This doesn't apply if you're a parent to a private school child, but you might be a grandparent, an auntie, an uncle, a Hanai brother, whatever. And what you'll see is you don't have to be a parent of a public school student to get involved and make complaints and that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do is walk us through the maze of how does the legal part work. So let's compare the philosophy of what liberty was in the founding era, and then in 1992 there was a huge exposition of a new philosophy of liberty that you'll recognize when you see it. So in founding era, James Madison, one of my favorite founding fathers, he said this talking about the First Amendment. which says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or inhibiting the free exercise thereof, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to petition the government for redress of grievances. The parents that are getting in trouble at complaining at the school boards, they're exercising that right to petition their government for redress of grievances. So what did he say? He said religion, and then he defines it for us. The duty which we owe to our Creator, that speaks a lot, and the manner of discharging it, that duty, can be directed only by reason and conviction, not by force or violence. So we owe a duty to our Creator, and we can only discharge our duty by our own conviction and by our own reason. He was worried about the history at the founding time in Europe where the kings had preferred religions and they, in the 1600s, burned people at the stake and all kinds of stuff for having a different belief system, right? Well, let's compare the founding era because, as we'll talk about a little later, the founding era is very important with our current Supreme Court. We'll get to that. So, in 1992, the U.S. Supreme Court had a case called Casey versus Planned Parenthood, and in that case, upholding the protections of abortion under the Constitution, he said this, and listen to this very different description of liberty. And by the way, the last slide on this show is also a QR code that you can click on with your phone and you'll pull down all these slides. So I have a friend out here who took pictures the last time I did this, and she actually looked at the picture of the slides on her camera and typed them up. You don't have to do that. But what did he say? At the heart of liberty, well, we know that in the founding era, liberty was talking directly about the most important liberty, which was the free exercise of religion. That was the absolute most important liberty. Justice Kennedy says, at the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence. Quite a jump. Of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. So I'm sharing that at the beginning, so we're going to say, wow, look at these two really different ways of looking at how we're supposed to organize ourselves together in society. One is looking at the manner of discharging the obligation that we owe our Creator, and the other one saying, make it up on your own. What Susan was sharing with you is full of make it up on your own. That's where we really, really are. But we're actually kind of lucky because the current Supreme Court is focusing on, if it's not written in the Constitution specifically, it's called extra-textual rights, like abortion, then they want to know if that issue was part of the history and tradition of the country, which is a beautiful framing of how to go forward from here. So as a constitutional conservative attorney, I'm pretty excited about that. So we're going to do a little civics really fast. The preamble to the U.S. Constitution, it was formally adopted June 21st, 1788, in case anybody cared. So the preamble says, we the people of the United States, not the people that used to be royals in England or in the colonies, not any other group. It's we the people, and we the people are now you and me. And too often, what I think we do is we think that the government is something else, and we're not part of it. And what I want you to understand is there's nothing separate from we the people that is, quote unquote, the government. There are some we the peoples that get paid by tax money, and they run things and they pass legislation, but that's only because they're in those positions. The rest of the we the people are either happy with it or not interested enough to get involved, or perhaps because you're here, are actually quite unhappy with it. So what we're going to look at is how does this actually work? Well, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. There was the Articles of Confederation before the Constitution, after 1776. that let the states do all kinds of individual things like coin their own money and tax each other for putting goods over the property lines of the states and that kind of stuff. So they wanted to make a more perfect union, establish justice. The Constitution's purpose is to establish justice. That's where you start when you feel you're experiencing injustice. To ensure domestic tranquility. What is the opposite of domestic tranquility? How about BLM riots in 2020? That's pretty non-tranquil. Well, the purpose of the Constitution is to ensure domestic tranquility. We need to use the Constitution to get our domestic tranquility back. To provide for the common defense, that kind of makes sense. To promote the general welfare, which is actually one of the main roles of government besides providing for defense. But this is my favorite: to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Remember, this is the preamble to the Constitution. They said, we the people, in order to do these things, establish the Constitution. So that's the starting point. If you have problems with injustice, lack of domestic tranquility, the general welfare, or protecting the blessings of liberty for your kids and grandkids, this is the first place to go because it's the most solid legal ground. No other statute, no other rule, no other policy can contradict these things, so it's a great place to start. What about the Hawaii Constitution? The Hawaii Constitution is a lot different. We're young, as we all know. But it went into effect in '59 when the president proclaimed that we were a state. So what does the Bill of Rights say? Section 1 of Article 1, all political power of this state is inherent in we, the people, and the responsibility for the exercise thereof rests with the people. All government is founded on this authority. We, the people, guys, it's not them in the Capitol. It's not them in Honolulu. It isn't. It's we, the people. But if we aren't participating in the group that's doing everything, that's our own fault. And I hope that after tonight you're going to go, gosh, I really got to watch a little bit less TV or whatever my wasting of time hobby is, and I actually need to protect my political power. I like to use this example. People think they don't own the government. The best example of that I can give you is my neighbor across the street has this really cool pickup truck. I've never ridden in it. I've never driven it. I've never put gas in it. I've never changed a tire. It's his truck. Your government isn't his truck. It's your car, is your government. You put gas in it, you drive it, you lock it up when you go into the store, you change the tires, you change the oil. Why? Because it's your car. This government is your car. And the very next provision is my second favorite. All persons are free by nature and are equal in their inherent inalienable rights. All these rights are the enjoyment of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. This is the Hawaii Constitution. And the acquiring and possessing of property. But then here's the kicker. These rights cannot endure unless the people recognize their corresponding obligations and responsibilities. That's the text of the Constitution for the state of Hawaii. All of the laws that the legislature passes has to be consistent with that. They're very happy to leave you out if you don't go down there. Eva and I are both lobbyists for Christian value, pro-life issues at the legislature. I'll tell you, the other side has a lot more lobbyists than we do. And we would welcome you to sign up with Hawaii Family Forum's website, HawaiiFamilyForum.org. Eva will keep you well informed of what's going on at the legislature between January and May of every year, let you know what the bills are, tell you when to show up, when to submit your testimony. Please, if you're not part of her network, and if I got any of that wrong, you can fix it when you get up here, please sign up. So how do we get school policies? So you've been voting, and over the last 50 plus years, the presidents have put in federal judges. Congress has enacted federal education statutes. The governor in Hawaii nominates judges and the school board. We don't vote for the school board anymore, but we could again if we change the Constitution back. And then our state legislature enacts laws, right? Congress started the Department of Education under Lyndon Baines Johnson. The federal government did not have a Department of Education prior to the 60s. It's not one of the enumerated powers the federal government in the Constitution is supposed to be involved with, but it falls under that general welfare provision because we let it. People can argue, do we or do we not need a federal Department of Ed, but that's where it came from. No Child Left Behind expanded it, and then in 2015, Every Student Succeeds by Obama initiated the ESEA law. Where do they come from in Hawaii? So the Hawaii Constitution actually has an entire chapter on education, chapter 10. It says that the state is going to provide a statewide system of public schools. Our Constitution says free from sectarian or religious control. That's a whole other story. Came out of the post-Civil War era when the Catholic parochial schools were being built and states didn't want kids to be allowed to go to parochial schools. We did it here in 1959 because it was fashionable. The end of this sentence says, there shall be no discrimination in public education institutions because of race, religion, sex, or ancestry, which means the public schools should not be discriminating against students on the basis of the student's religion. The Hawaii Constitution is a state foundational law document, just like the U.S. Constitution is on the federal level. We also, under the state constitution, the next section tells us we're going to have a board of education that gets nominated by the governor and, with the consent of the Senate, appointed. Prior to 2010, we used to elect the board. There was a legislative constitutional amendment proposed. Eva and I were going crazy trying to get people to vote no, and we voluntarily gave up our right to elect our school board members. But that same process can be replicated. If you remember, prohibition was a constitutional amendment and then it was repealed. So we can change it, and we need to change it, because school board members that are appointed by the governor can be very well-meaning people, but they don't need your vote, so there's a different level of attention they would pay to you when you're complaining about things. We need them to be elected. So, we changed it in 2010. Now we don't vote. The governor appoints, right? Who did you vote for governor in these elections? What about this year? Is this an issue you want to call people running for governor and say, what's your position on electing the school board? Would you support asking the legislature to put a bill in to amend the Constitution so we can vote on it? I would. And if you get Eva's election questionnaire she sent to the candidates, you can find out there are a couple of ed questions that she's going to address, I hope, tonight. We need to take the information we're learning tonight from Susan, me, and Eva, and we need to apply it. We have an election going on right now. And then it's going to get whittled down, and in October, November, we're going to vote for the guys that win on Saturday. These are very important questions that you need to call these candidates and say, hey, you know, I'm trying to figure out if I want to vote for you. What's your position on letting us elect our school board members again? And there's other things along my presentation that I'll share with you about how to deal with that. So what is the legislature doing in 2022? What did they do? It infuriated me. There was a bill that passed the House. It went to the Senate. The Senate didn't hear the bill, so it's waiting in the Senate for next year. But the proponents of the bill in the House will push this until they get it, because that's what happens in Hawaii. 23 years after it first came up, we ended up having to suffer through physician-assisted suicide. Same-sex marriage was decades in the pressing before the legislature passed the law, right? So this bill, which is House Bill 1697, basically said that the state legislature was going to require the State Department of Education, even though the Board of Education runs the school system, to include only positive and accurate representations of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, intersex, asexual, or other sexual orientations and gender identities, persons of color and disability communities, for the purpose of destigmatizing and promoting sexual health. And they had to do the same thing in their course topics. Now, the interesting thing is, these are the members of the House Education Committee that voted yes and voted no. And if any of these names are on the ballot and they're running for re-election, I want you to call them and ask them why they thought this was such a good idea, and in particular, why the Senate killed it, didn't do anything with it. So Woodson, Capella, Bellotti, Clark, Ganaden, Hashimoto, Ono, Takayama, Yamani all voted yes. Representative Gates voted yes with reservations, which means he had problems with it, but he voted yes anyway. And there were 2 representatives on the committee that voted no, Quinlan and Okimoto. So what's really interesting about that is that the Board of Education has a policy for controversial issues. And what it says is, student discussions of issues which generate opposing points of view shall be considered a normal part of the learning process in every area of the school program. The depth of the discussion shall be determined by the maturity of the students. Teachers shall refer students to resources reflecting multiple and diverse points of view. Discussions, including contributions made by the teacher or resource person, shall be maintained on an objective, factual basis. It's very different than that bill the House passed. Stress shall be placed on learning how to make judgments based on facts. It's a very good policy. It's been around since 2015. It's a very good policy. When you call those people on the House Education Committee, ask them why they were trying to run this over with a steamroller. This is a good policy. This is the way education should happen. Then there was HB 2125. This was related to, as you remember, Loudoun County, Virginia, parents getting very upset about the transgender student stuff in the schools, and they came to the school board meetings and they got arrested. The Association of School Boards asked the president to call parents at school board meetings domestic terrorists, right? Remember all that? We had it here at the legislature. This bill, which was passed by the House, creates the offense of harassment of an educational worker for disrupting or interfering with the administration or function of a school, school administration, office, or school board. Hang on a second, I passed it. So, as you can see, Woodson, Capella, Clark, Gates, Hashimoto, Quinlan, Takayama, Yamani voted yes. Yes with reservation was Ganaden, and there was 1 no, Okimoto, and 2 representatives were excused, Bellotti and Ono. They wanted to make it a crime for parents to go to school boards and complain about what they're doing when they, in the same committee, passed that bill steamrolling the Board of Education controversial issues policy. This is what we're dealing with. And hopefully you'll grab these slides and you'll look through them again because it's got a lot of stuff in it and we're not even halfway through it. But it's serious stuff, and we the people have to take our country back. So what are parents' and students' rights? So every year, because there is a federal Department of Education, the Department of Education at the federal level requires every school district that gets money, which is probably every primary and secondary school in the country, although not necessarily true public schools, they have to distribute. So you've seen these if you get the packet at the beginning of school. This has been in there. And what it says is that the Department of Education in Hawaii will prohibit discrimination on the basis of race, sex, age, color, national origin, religion, disability, extends to all the Hawaii DOE programs and activities. It includes at employment, it includes in admissions. It prohibits retaliation for reporting discrimination. It prohibits harassment on the basis of those protected class status. And it encourages people to report harassment. And it tells you that the Hawaii Department of Education Office, Civil Rights Compliance Officer, or the Office for Civil Rights in the U.S. Department of Ed will take a complaint, but you've got to make it within 180 days of the date of the discriminatory conduct. So that's kind of like 6 months, but if something happens July 1st, because of all the 31-day months, 180 days is going to be before December 31st. So it's actually counted by days on the calendar, not 6 months, which we would usually say 180 days is. So how do these rights get enforced? So under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the United States Attorney General, Merrick Garland, is authorized to address certain equal protection violations based on religion separate from all the other categories, which is kind of interesting. So if you are objecting to what's going on in the public school on the basis of religion, just keep in mind you can complain to the School Office of Civil Rights, but you can also complain to the United States Attorney General's office, the Office of Civil Rights. And the Equal Opportunity section of the U.S. Department works to ensure this is like mandatory on them. So you need to take advantage of the opportunity to exercise your muscles. They have to do this stuff. They have to ensure that all persons, regardless of their religion, are provided equal educational opportunities. They address discrimination and harassment on the basis of religion, and it's all religions, any religion. The DOE regulations you'll find that in fact, what I want you to do when you use these slides are the framework of the words you're going to use in the complaint letter that you write to the Hawaii DOE, because you're going to explain to them what you know they've got to do so that they don't think you don't know and they'll do what they're supposed to do. So, under Section 8-89-1 of the Department of Education regulations, this isn't passed by the legislature, it's passed by the department through rule making, okay? So I want you to say in your letter, "Dear Director of the Department of Education, because I know the department is committed to making all schools safe, inclusive, respectful, and supportive of all students by eliminating all discrimination, harassment, and bullying, and providing non-discriminatory learning environment that provides equal access to public education for all students and embraces the value and dignity and respect for one another, I'm writing you this letter." They'll know that this is their duty and obligation, right? And who can complain? And this is important, why I said you don't have to be the parent of a public school student. Anybody that witnesses or is otherwise aware of conduct prohibited by this chapter can file complaints. Grandparents with their grandkids, neighbors with neighbor kids, bus drivers, anybody that witnesses discriminatory action by people in DOE can complain, and we need to. And then you can say, and I also know that the department shall take immediate and appropriate steps to stop discrimination, harassment, or bullying against a student to prevent reoccurrence and to remedy discrimination, and I look forward to your letter. So what happens? The DOE in Hawaii Civil Rights Compliance Branch, listen to this, shall coordinate the implementation of this chapter Civil Rights Compliance Branch shall be responsible for monitoring complaints and conducting investigations. So what are the definitions, just so you know? So discrimination is participation in or excluding or denying the benefits of a department's program or otherwise treating a student differently on the basis of a protected class. That is a huge hole in the wall to drive a tank through. You can complain about something if you can describe it that way. So don't let them tell you your complaint doesn't apply. This is how you complain. So what's a protected class basis? Okay, race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, age, national origin, ancestry, disability, physical appearance and characteristics, socioeconomic status. The hole in the wall just got bigger. What's a complaint? The complainant is any student, parent, or legal guardian of any student, employee, volunteer, member of the community who witnesses or is otherwise aware of conduct prohibited, who files a complaint. What's an employee? Full-time, part-time, casual, substitute, temporary, volunteers, third parties that negatively impacts a protected class student's ability to participate in or receive benefits, services, or opportunities in a school program. So anybody practically that has anything to do with the DOE is covered, and you can complain about them if you have evidence of a discriminatory act. So we need to, I remember in 2007, Glenn Beck was on Fox back then, used to use those chalkboards and write all this stuff, and I learned about Howard and Cliven, or whoever those two guys were, that wrote a book about if you want to knock America down, you overwhelm the system. There are so many complaints that could be filed based on stuff that's already happened. We can overwhelm the system and make them deal with it, but it requires that we all get involved. So what is harassment? This is just really, it blows my mind. They write this in their regs, and then we can turn around and use it against them. Basically, disrupting the orderly operation of a school or interfering with the student's educational performance opportunities or benefits. So if your kid comes home from school and they don't want to do their homework because the teacher called them a religious bigot or something, I don't know, you got a complaint. That easy, that simple. So what's the process? So Section 889.6 tells us that when a complaint's received, and this is a shall, the Civil Rights Compliance Branch, and you can put this in your letter, I'm looking forward to the Civil Rights Compliance Branch promptly assessing the situation and determining if the complaint falls under this chapter and investigating, and if they determine the complaint doesn't, they're going to refer us to the appropriate office. I would put that in the letter. So F, when an investigation is required, the Civil Rights Compliance Branch will assign an impartial investigator to conduct the investigation. Your letter should say, I'm looking very forward to meeting my impartial investigator that's going to conduct the investigation, because we need to tell them we know this stuff. So the investigator, this is in the DOE regulations, okay, shall make a good faith effort to conduct a fair, impartial investigation in a timely manner to provide all parties with resolution. The investigation will be completed in 60 calendar days of the filing of the complaint or the report of suspected violation, unless they determine in their discretion that they need more time. But you can let them know in your letter that the 60-day deadline is what you're expecting. So in addition to doing this complaint process, there is a regulation section that says that you can still do other things instead or together with the complaints to the DOE in Hawaii. You can file a complaint under the chapter at the time the complaint is filed, at any time during the pendency of the complaint under this, or after it's been addressed. So you can still sue. So let's look at the court cases. The history of parental rights, like a lot of things, has gone in the favor of parents, not in favor of parents, but I think with our current Supreme Court's view toward the tradition and history of what's expected in our country, the current Supreme Court is more likely than the prior Supreme Courts to think that the parents' original parenting rights are what should be enforced under the Constitution. Well, let's look at them. So in 1923, this was after the First World War, Nebraska outlawed the teaching of the German language in schools. And this teacher, whose job had been teaching German to American students, didn't have any work. He lost his job, so he sued, and he won, actually. And what the court said in Meyer versus Nebraska is going to come back way bigger with our current Supreme Court. So the liberty that's guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, the 14th Amendment and the 13th Amendment followed the end of the Civil War. Outlawed discrimination, provided due process, made the original Bill of Rights applicable to the states, because you may not know, before the 13th and 14th Amendments, the states couldn't be held accountable for violating the Bill of Rights in the federal Constitution. They had their own constitutions, and we all shared the federal constitutions, which regulated the federal government. So, but what did he say? Okay, the liberty that's guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, which is the due process. You get due process, so the government can't do things even if they're not expressly stated. 14th Amendment is where Roe v. Wade came from. It means more than the freedom from bodily restraint, but also the right of the individual to enter into a contract. This guy didn't get his contract to teach German. To engage in any of the common occupations of life. To acquire useful knowledge. To marry. To establish a home and bring up children. To worship God according to the dictates of his own conscience. That's the history and tradition that James Madison was talking about. And generally to enjoy those privileges long recognized at common law. Does that sound like history and tradition to you? It does to me. As essential to the orderly pursuit of happiness by free men. I think this is what our current Supreme Court's going to look back on parental rights cases. A couple of years later, we had the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously in 1925 ruled that it violated that same right to make educational decisions. They cited the Meyer v. Nebraska case by essentially requiring only public school. 1925 had to do with not liking parochial schools that Catholics ran for Catholic kids and other kids. So they were trying to close down the Catholic schools. They did, though, recognize that the state has a right to regulate ed and even in non-public schools, but they couldn't outlaw it. In Hawaii, in the 70s, we had Medeiros versus Kiyosaki, which challenged a sex ed film series in the schools. The Hawaii Supreme Court, 5-0, unanimously ruled that because it had an opt-out, it wasn't compulsory and therefore did not violate constitutional rights. I want you to put this in any opt-out request that you make to a school. Cite to Medeiros versus Kiyosaki. That is your key to an opt-out. Then in 2005, in the federal court system in the Ninth Circuit, which Hawaii, California, Nevada, Arizona, Oregon, Washington, we're in the Ninth Circuit. So if the Ninth Circuit makes a ruling in a case, it applies here unless in the federal court system, unless the U.S. Supreme Court changes it. This case, the Supreme Court of the United States did not take the appeal. So this case stays, and this is where parental rights started heading down 15 years ago. They ruled that the parents of elementary school children that were 7 to 10 years old did not have a constitutional right to prevent the school from giving sex topic information in the manner selected by the school district or taking psychological surveys of the students because that stuff the Ninth Circuit said was a reasonable state action pursuing legitimate educational interests. So that was bad. It's been bad until June of 2022, when our Supreme Court came out with all these great cases. So non-textual constitutional rights means that the right you're talking about is not in the text. It's not freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right to keep and bear arms, the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizure. It's not in the text. Abortion, gay rights, transgender protections, those are what are called non-textual constitutional rights. So the Supreme Court of the United States, starting this year, has made a return to that old history and tradition. Roe v. Wade fell to that. The concealed carry case was upheld on that basis. So I think parental rights issues are now is the time to bring them, because we have a court that wants to look back to what James Madison was saying. And what were parents doing back then? What we want to do, not what the ESSER and the SELs and those guys want to do. So let's look a little bit more closely at Meyer. They evaluated that 14th Amendment language, no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process. The court said it's not just freedom from bodily restraint, and I read that paragraph to you, but in Oregon, or in Nebraska, where Meyer was, in 1787, they had an ordinance that said this: religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. So, corresponding to the right of control, it's the natural duty of the parent to give his children education suitable to their station in life. And nearly all the states, including Nebraska, enforce those obligatory compulsory education laws. Hawaii, in the 19th century, was the Kingdom of Hawaii. It was the most thoroughly Christian country at the time on the globe. The faith here was amazing. So if we have a case dealing with something in Hawaii, we can attempt to let the court know, hey, we're in Hawaii. Nebraska had that 1787 thing. Look what we had. So it's very exciting. It's not business as usual where you just get stamped down at the DOE. So in Pierce v. Society of Sisters, the Catholic school thing, they basically said that the entirety of that law prohibiting Catholic education was unconstitutional, and that the Constitution can't be abridged by a piece of legislation that has no reasonable relation to some purpose within the competency of the state. The competency of the state goes back to the state constitution. That's its fundamental competency. The fundamental theory of liberty, upon which all governments in this union repose, excludes any general power of the state to standardize its children by forcing them to accept instruction from public teachers only. Look at this one. The child is, this is in that case, the child is not the mere creature of the state. Those who nurture him and direct his destiny have the right, coupled with the high duty, to recognize and prepare him for additional obligations. That's what we want the Supreme Court to focus on with our kids. That is how we win. So we realize that we are the people. The people need to control the federal government, the state government, and the House and the Board of Ed. The time has come, and this is hard for some people, but we really need to do it. The time has come to abandon that idea that we're not supposed to discuss politics and religion. We have to. Because we haven't been, this is what we have. And you want to do it, as Eva's always great to remind me, as an ambassador of Christ. That's the foundational thing. So This comes from that ADF Parents Toolkit. So you want to take an active role, what can you do? They have this acronym, ACT, Accountability, Choice, Transparency. So how do we use accountability? We make the school board accountable. We make the legislature accountable. We take legal action. The judges can make them accountable. How do we make them accountable? I'm running out of time. We ask them what they're doing. We engage them when we don't agree. We file these complaints. We tell our legislators we want to vote for the Board of Education. We go to the legislature because you get the info from EVA and you know when the legislature's passing these crazy bills related to the Department of Ed and that kind of stuff. What's the other part? So you need to exercise your choices. Opting out, you can opt out of the entire public school system. Not easy to do, everybody can't do it. I would say please seriously pray, ponder, research, figure out if you can, because that will save your kids. This SEL stuff is going to destroy your kids. That's what they want to do. Opting in. Hawaii, we've been trying for a long time to change the policy to an opt-in. You can help us working with the policy change mechanisms in the DOE and the Board of Education to get them to change it to opt-in instead of opt-out. Well, how does that happen? When they've got so many complaints that the system is overwhelmed and they got to deal with it. That's an easy solution. Okay, we'll just make it opt-in. There are a lot of people that don't like that idea. What about transparency? The laws provide a couple of resources that you can use. Freedom of Information Act. Public school curriculum, public school records that are not student records and not employee records are public records. Curriculum, reading lists, speaker lists, all that stuff. Under the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, your own child's public school records are available to you until your child turns 18, and then it shifts to your child. But until your child is 18, FERPA gives you the absolute legal authority that the school cannot keep you from seeing your educational records. There are probably situations where a judge would not let you if you were beating your kid or sexually abusing your kid or something really egregious. But I'm talking about generally parents and kids in the public school system, you have the right to see your children's records. No other kids' records, and nobody can see your kids. It's private. But you're the parent, they have to share it with you. And the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment came after that Palmdale case about the psychological surveys, and it gives you the right to opt out. So with this information, we're expecting that you're going to know all of this stuff, and you're no longer going to let them work against you in them doing this stuff. So when you vote, what's going on in the Department of Ed needs to be something you talk to the candidate that wants your vote about. Okay? So here's what I want you to do. It's not separate from you, it's your car. And I want to leave you with this quote. Please read it twice before you abandon it, okay? So this reminds me of Punch Bowl Cemetery. It's really seriously important. That QR code has those slides in it. I urge you to take it down because you can write your letter with those regulation paragraphs. Thank you very much.
Do what? Doesn't matter. Okay. We'll leave that up for a couple minutes. In fact, if leave this up for a couple of minutes, and maybe during the break you can throw back up Susan's, just in case people miss that. And for those of you watching online, I'm trying to monitor the chat online, so if you have a question in the next section, when we come back from the 2-minute break, you can go ahead and write it in the chat, and then we're going to open up questions to all of you. So we may not be able to get to every question, but we will do our best. So 2 minutes, and we will be right back. All right, 2 minutes. We got to stay on track because we want you guys to get home before midnight. And I want to prepare you because I know that when it comes to the open mic and questions, I know what's going to happen. People get excited, they get the mic, and then they start their questions like this. You know, in 1952 when I was born and my mother wouldn't tell me stuff, and then you get 2 hours into the question before you get to it. So I want to make sure when you get the mic and that comes to you, get to the question, try very hard. And the other thing too is when we get to the questions, make sure you say who you have the question for, whether it's for Susan or whether it's for Jim. But before we jump into that, I just want to kind of wrap everything up just really quickly before we jump into there. When we talk about action, I want to start, as we always do as Christians, with the Bible. I know you're shocked, But I would feel very bad if I left today without at least mentioning God in what we do, because what we do because the Lord called us to do this. And besides, Pastor Jonathan is staring at me. So I want him to know that we do use God, you know, in our things. And for those of you watching online, it's who we are, what we do. We are wrapped up in the chosen people. That's what we do because God has marked us. He's called us by name. And I think the last time I checked the scriptures, it says we were kind of carved on the palm of his hand, which means he kind of looks at us all the time. But I know that I'm Portuguese, so I'm sure that the way God sees me all the time is, okay, that's my one joke for the night. Okay, so I want to go to Deuteronomy chapter 11. And in this chapter, they're reminding the Israelites that as they're telling their stories of what happened, it's really, really important that parents stay plugged in to tell the story to the children, because that's how the legacy lives. The legacy lives because parents have an interaction with their kids. And it's in this interaction that this manna takes place, that this living, breathing thing happens. It's magic. It's how kids grow, is this deep relationship they have with their parents. So I'm taking you to Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 18. Therefore, take these words of mine into your heart and soul. Bind them on your arm as a sign, and let them be as a pendant on your forehead. Teach them to your children, speaking of them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. And write them on the doorposts of your houses and on your gates, so that as long as the heavens are above the earth, you and your children may live on in the land which the Lord swore to your ancestors he would give them. So the first call to action is that all action begins at home. As Christians, we know and understand that education, the foremost educational responsibility, is the parent. It's not the public school system. And the other thing, too, is I've heard this from people go, well, I don't have kids in public school. My kids go private school. And I go, yeah, but you pay taxes, right? Guess where your taxes go? Your taxes go into the public school system. So as a taxpayer, you should be very much aware of what the public school system is doing with your taxpayer money. So when bills come up at the Capitol, you have a right to go up and raise your voice, too, because it's your kala. And so we need to take that responsibility. The other thing that happens in the home, we educate ourselves, as Susan mentioned in her talk, and we educate our kids. That's what's really, really important. But it doesn't stop there. I like to call it the Portuguese grapevine. Because you all know that once Portuguese people start talking, the talking goes on and on and on and on. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I have a Portuguese grandfather and grandmother, because my dad is full-blooded Portuguese. And we heard the same story over and over again. You know how long I used to walk to school? I would wake up in the morning barefoot and walk down to school, 3 miles to school in 3rd grade. And I'm like, Dad, your school is like right down the road. But that's what happens, the stories. And I think that we have a very important responsibility to tell the story, to tell the truth. So what we learn, we share, we talk about. I remember when one of the bills that was happening at the Capitol, somebody called me and they go, Eva, how do we get the word out? And I said, talk about it. And they said, well, we do, but what do you mean talk about it? I go, when you go grocery shopping and you're standing in line, Tell the cashier, hey, did you hear about the bill that's moving through the legislature? And then the cashier will go, no, tell me about it. Now, not only are you talking about it to the cashier, but everybody behind you in the line is going to hear it too. But I always say to do it in love. I mean, I know how it gets. Jim and I have been doing this for a long time, and I can tell you personally that being down at the Capitol, there's been many, 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 many times that I wanted to call down the wrath of God. God, do something. But every time I want to do that, what begins to burn in my heart is he loves them too. Every issue has a story. Every issue has a story. So when somebody is testifying at the Capitol in opposition to what Jim and I are doing, I remember that they're humans too. It doesn't stop me from my responsibility, but my responsibility is to love everybody. And I think in the 20 plus years I've been doing this, that I've been good at doing it, although I know I've failed sometimes. Now, what happens, the stories go, that moves, but as we're moving through the year, things happen. So the legislature comes up, and all of this stuff that Jim mentioned, then we need people to weigh in. Because what happens a lot of time is Jim and I go down to the Capitol and we're weighing in, and it's me and Jim, and we say that the faith-based community is opposed to that, and they go, you and who? You and your two friends, because there's nobody there. And the other side will come in and bring in hundreds of people because they have Planned Parenthood, and Planned Parenthood has these lists that they can send out, and then they get all these young people that come in and testify, and again, it's just me and Jim and maybe a few brave people. We need your voices on these issues, and the only way you're going to know what's happening is if you plug into Hawaii Family Forum. But that doesn't stop there either, because every other year is an election year. And what happens in an election year here in the state of Hawaii, we've always been one of the lowest in the nation at voter registration and turnout. We have been. Now they're mailing everybody a ballot, and they're all excited about the numbers. But you know what happens? Now we have people that are voting that may be uneducated about who they're voting for. Because now they're just, oh, I circled a D, or I'm going to circle the Hawaiian name, or I'm going to circle the Japanese name, because that's how people in Hawaii vote, believe it or not. Now, I'm not, okay, I know people are watching and listening, and some people here, they're like, wait a second, I do a good job researching, so I'm not trying to paint everybody with that same brush. But here in Hawaii, we have a loyalty. And so people that get into office tend to stay in office forever. And then when they do leave office, what do? They run for governor, they run for senator, U.S. congressperson, because we have the spinning vortex of death. People get in public office and they just stay there. I'm not saying that people that are in there a long time don't have a lot to give. I'm just saying that there's a lot of great people in the community that we need to encourage them to run. And then when good people are running, we need to stand with them. And for all my friends and family members and those that have worked alongside me, they know that running for office is a hard thing because people go through your laundry. And it's a nasty thing. I mean, we're watching it happen even now. To watch all these nasty ads that are happening, we don't need to do that. I don't want to know that. What I want to know is what you're going to do for this great state. That's what I want to do. And that's why Hawaii Family Forum produces our voter guide, because we want you to see the candidates that respond, how they're going to vote on certain issues. And we've made it easy for you that even those that don't respond, the PDF is interactive. So if they didn't respond, you can click right on their website and go. There's a phone number. You can call them and ask the questions that Jim asked you to ask. And I think that if these issues are important to you, you have to stay plugged in. But most of all, your biggest action is to pray. Because this country, when it was being birthed, men and women lost their lives trying to build this great country. The signers of the Declaration of Independence knew that when they put their name on that document, that they were telling King George, come get me, come get my family, kill my kids. They knew that's how much they believed in this great nation that we stand for. One nation under God. And even those that don't agree with us are part of this nation, and we have to love them too. But we have to stop being silent. The faith-based community has been beat up for so long, but now it's time. It's time to rise up, because I don't believe the Lord is done with our nation yet. I believe that there is greater good yet to come. If we just open our hearts and minds and do a little bit of education and research, talk story, keep it going, encourage, stand together, we can make a difference. Right? Can I get an amen, please? Okay, I know it's like a lot of work we've been doing over here, and you guys drinking out of a fire hose, but let's get to the good part. Let's get to the questions. What I want to do with the questions first is, because our online people have been so patient, we're going to pass around the mics. Jim, the first question is for you, actually. One of our viewers, you can grab them. You come up here, Jim. I've got a mic. You come and take the main mic, because you're probably going to get the big questions. Okay, so this question, hello?
You're not on.
I am on. Hello, oh, there I am. Okay, can you ask Jim if there are different form letters that we could get regarding discrimination?
There are a lot of groups that work together in Hawaii, and I think they produce form letters, but you don't really want to use a form letter. what you want to do is take the language from the regulation and give it back to them so they know that you're not fooling around. You put that much energy into your complaint. If you just take a form letter, check off some boxes, put your kid's name and send it in, you're not even in the game. That is the easy way to do it, but I would hope that you would not do it that way. Should I ask myself another question?
I have a question about the Biden administration's proposal for the changes for Title IX, and that can cover curriculum, but athletics and the facilities at the schools. So what Parents Defending Education, what the attorneys there were saying, that if this goes through, some of this discrimination can get worse against us because they can use all the things you were citing, because what it does is it reinterprets the word sex for gender identity. So then the gender identity becomes a real legal protected class.
So what the current Department of Education is proposing is going back to what the Obama Department of Education proposed before Trump came in and changed it, and that's why voting is important. What happened when Obama had the Title IX stuff, a lot of lawsuits happened, and actually, with respect to the transgender boys that think they're girls playing in girls' sports, that has gotten huge pushback from women in athletics because it's totally unfair. So what's happening now is they're proposing to go back, and what I'm assuming is going to happen is the same people that filed the lawsuits the first time are going to file the lawsuits again, and in the meantime, what we need to do here is file complaints on gender identity, was in the list, and privacy if it's dealing with a locker room. Make those complaints to the DOE. You can't just sit back and wait for somebody else. It's over. That time is gone. And while we were acting like that, the proponents of all this quote-unquote new good stuff have been flooding the marketplace. So we're swimming upstream, but we have to do it. We can't abandon the project. So, yeah, the federal government gives the money to the state. The state takes the money, has to do what the federal government says. Absolutely true. But the state constitution says no discrimination in the educational system, and the regulations say they have to quickly, impartially, fairly evaluate, and they've got to do stuff. So that's why I don't like form letters. That's why I like the long form complaint, but all you have to do is take the language out of the slides and cut and paste them into your letter and then change them so the grammar's right. But you're right. The Biden administration has gone back to what Obama started with the transgender stuff in the school system, and they give the money to control participation, but we can't give up. You got another question?
I do. Thank you. I'm not sure who to actually pose this to, and I apologize, I came in late, so you may have already addressed it. But this whole SEL, will it also apply to immersion schools and charter schools and, say, private schools and homeschooling?
Are you talking about the SEL?
Yes, the SEL.
You want to come up, Susan? I can tell you that the Department of Education is separate from the private schools and they have their own association. But go ahead.
The answer is yes. It'll get in there. It's going to get in there. And there's already, like in Ohio, they already have what they call biblically based SEL. So everybody wants to get in on it, right? Because there's just a lot of money. So if you're a company and you want to create your SEL program with those 5 domains, yeah, it's going to get in there.
I have a question for Jim. So other than the QR code, is there a way that we could access these cut and paste sort of things so that we can make complaints, real fast, real easy for people who aren't so educated in wanting to make a complaint, to convince them to make a complaint,
So I'm not sure what the question
What we can do is, if you've registered and we have your email, I can get together with Susan, because one of the online watchers was also asking how they can access some of the information
not
in
working?
your slides. So, no, they're getting your PowerPoints, but you have information in the slides that they want to access.
Yeah, so if I were to convince someone, like, let's say at the skate park or like at my work, to, hey, you might want to look into this, here's the information to make a formal complaint, is there any website I could go to, Instagram page, Facebook page, where I could access that information?
No, my PowerPoint came from my reading those cases, my taking language out of the constitutions, out of the regulations, out of the school board policy. And by the way, somehow this fell out of my slides, but in case you did not know, in Hawaii, in the Department of Education, in the 1990s, there was one thing that was absolutely forbidden, and it's still forbidden today, in any school activity on or off campus, in any school vehicle, with any school equipment, employees, students, everything, which means it's quite possible to outlaw certain things that ought not to be allowed in school. Does anybody know what's absolutely forbidden in the public schools? Smoking cigarettes. Yeah, they totally forbid it. It's written in the smoking in the schools part of the DOE regulations. In fact, the slide, I don't know where it went, it fell out. But anyway, what I was going to do with it is say, take this language and take out the word smoking or tobacco products and put in the thing you want the school board to outlaw, and bring that in and say, we want you to pass this new policy. And when they say, oh, well, we can't forbid things, you can tell them where you got it.
Yeah, but I don't want to dismiss, because what you brought up is a very good question. I mean, a lot of people aren't going to look at your whole presentation to figure out, well, how do I do this one step? So what I will do is, if I have your email, I will sit down with Susan and Jim, and we'll look through the PowerPoints, and we will put together a packet that we can make people where they can get these links easily, rather than seeing your whole PowerPoint. Because I think they want to do action.
Okay.
And so we'll make it easier for you. Will that be okay? Yeah. All right. So give us a little time to do that, but we will get that together. Can you add that cigarette thing? Oh, the cigarette thing? Yeah, okay. We'll talk about that and put that all together. Now, I think this question would be best answered by Susan, so I'll go over there. You have a question?
I thought maybe if you had the opportunity to take that cigarette thing just to the logical extension.
I can't hear you.
To expand on the absolute illegal use of a cigarette.
What the policy says is what it says is the Department of Education wants to have a great education system that promotes learning and health, and therefore we hate cigarettes, so you can't smoke cigarettes anywhere on campus, in any vehicles that belong, no matter if they're on campus, at events that occur off campus. I mean, it's like totally forbidden.
Well, what about, as she said, touching a child or endangering the health and welfare of a child? If there's something, a psychological abuse, could you say that's the same thing, touching or exposing yourself?
I would say take that paragraph, take out the word tobacco and smoking, and put in whatever you want the school board to say can't happen with school personnel. Whatever it is, touching kids, spanking kids, bringing them to abortion clinics, I don't know, whatever your issue is, use that framework.
And is the fact that educators are mandated reporters, that if an educator is aware of any of those things, they have to report it?
Correct.
And if they don't report it, what are the legal implications of them not?
True.
So what?
So when Planned Parenthood does an abortion on a 10-year-old girl that had to get driven from Ohio to Indiana, and the guy that raped her was 27 years old, instead of reporting that absolute required reportable event, Planned Parenthood said he was 17. Or whatever was in the legal, and they said she was 13. So, yeah, but I agree, that is required by the law, and we should go to the school board and say, we want this policy this way. Everybody knows you're not supposed to touch kids, but we also hear in the news kids get touched, right? So why not have that policy? Absolutely.
Yeah, we understand that we've given you guys a lot of information, and as you feed back to us, then we're going to know what we need to build in order to provide for you. So please keep continuing to ask these questions. So Susan, I think you'd be the best one. So you want to stand up because this came from one of our watchers. Is a collective effort underway to get all like-minded concerned parents together for more meetings and rallies in the future to address this craziness?
That answer should be provided by somebody from Moms for Liberty, maybe.
Moms for Liberty.
Not to put you on the
Well,
spot.
there's
but, you know,
several groups. Moms for Liberty is a national group, and I started a chapter in Hawaii. Hopefully we'll open on other islands as well. But we also have Fathers and Mothers for Children, and we built that website, Hawaii Parents United, so that there's a coalition. So hopefully we'll, stay in touch with Eva on the bills that are coming up, and then we'll build our mailing list, and we'll have a call to action on every one of those bills.
Yeah, I think we're trying. This is we're just now in the process of trying to just educate people and make them aware of what's going on, and then hopefully it will build as people share information.
Yep, this movement's going to grow because as more people talk about it and more people are aware of what's happening, because a lot of times you all know what happens in Hawaii is if we hear about something on the mainland, we're like, that's not us. That's not us. But unfortunately, it is here and it is in our schools. So we have to talk about it. We have to get the information out. So Jim, I think this question might be best for you to answer, although this watcher did say that it could be for either of you. But is it not practical to consider a class action suit against the DOE and BOE?
Well, you can't just file a class action suit because you want to. There are requirements for a class action suit, and it has to be approved by the judge. So typically the answer is no, because every kid's interaction at school is separate and independent, and so that wouldn't be a class action kind of a complaint. If WorldCom misrepresents in their prospectus on their stock offering the same thing to 1 million people, that's a class action actionable event because it's the same for everybody. But if each injury happened on a different day, a different time, a different way, then it's really not very easy to make it into a class action.
Okay. Well, oh, good. I like seeing hands go up. We got one here and then we got one here.
Can we talk about what's going on right now where student athletes are being forced to be vaccinated to participate in the athletic sport of their choice, and the masking issues that we faced these past 2 years? What can parents do to legally fight back? We tried everything we knew to fight back on those policies, and we weren't successful.
So, yes, and that's a very good question. In 2020, I filed 2 COVID constitutional violation cases in Hawaii, one in federal court, one in state court. I currently have a COVID case against Hawaiian Airlines in federal court. The Hawaii cases from 2020, actually, if you remember when well, the short answer is the judges don't want to have anything to do with not making COVID not kill everybody. I mean, it's kind of dumb. But in the 2 cases that I had with Harmeet Dillon in 2020, the health department was getting their epidemiologists to testify under oath that everybody's going to get COVID because it's highly infectious and it's also very deadly, so a lot of people are going to die, and therefore we have to violate all these rights. And we couldn't find an epidemiologist that was willing to be a counter expert because of what they were doing to doctors in 2020 who took positions contrary to the CDC on COVID. And so the judges in both of those cases just said, no, we're going with the state. And I don't know, in my case now, it's not against the state, it's against Hawaiian Airlines, which is a completely different legal standard. So I don't know what the health department in the state of Hawaii would say, but my guess is they'd probably try to stick with that position if they could get away with it, because it's a winner. And the Department of the Attorney General represented them in my 2 cases, in Victor Mark's case, in all of the COVID cases that came through. They know all the pleadings. I mean, they were in all the cases, so it's not a secret. It's not like they don't know in the next case to say to the judge, well, we've been winning these, hands down because COVID's just this bad. I think it would be hard with a straight face to say it, but in July of 2020, it was hard to say it with a straight face, but they did anyway. So what can you do? You've got to opt out. That's what you got to do. You got to exercise that. I can't hear you. I mean, sometimes from a practical perspective, you can spin your wheels, but in this town on COVID, the judges don't want to be the guy responsible.
Is it considered discriminatory to deny a student the right to participate in a school activity based not on sex, gender, not marital status, but all those other statuses, religion, but you can eliminate their right based on vaccination status?
Well, vaccination status is not the issue because it's not one of the listed categories. But if your objection to the vaccination is based on a religious basis, it is included in the list. So you should file the complaint with the DOE, not with the courts. On COVID right now, I don't think in Hawaii, in other states, they elect their judges, so their judges are different in the way they do cases. All of our judges are through appointment. And the federal judges are appointed for life. The magistrates in the federal system are for 10 years. Our state judges are appointed for 10 years. If they want to get reappointed, they've got to toe the line. That's what's happening. I mean, we live here. The weather's great. So what? The governor? Oh, you did come late. All right. Slide 17. No. The governor nominates judges. The Senate ratifies, confirms the nomination, and that's how they become judges. We don't elect our judges in Hawaii.
So my question was, actually, I was going to ask the same question about the student athletes, but I have something else. I was wondering if a FOIA request might work in this case, and I'll tell you a little backstory. I went to the BOE meeting, the public meeting, the first one in 2 years, about 2 weeks ago. After the meeting, I talked to the superintendent and asked him, what statutory authority, what gives you the authority to impose a vaccine mandate on student athletes? Can you tell me where in the DOE statutes, where does it say that you can practice medicine without a license, especially since these products are still under EUA? And he's like, oh, yeah, I have it in the statutes. I said, well, can you share it with me? So he took my email address. He said he was going to email it to me, which of course he didn't. Called his office a million times. They're avoiding me. So can I write a letter, like a FOIA request, like can you, to request this document and then have them answer me like nothing like that exists, because it doesn't?
Well, I wouldn't ask for a statute. I would ask for the legal authority, because a statute is a public record. It's not a DOE document.
Okay.
So you want to ask for the authority that they're relying on. But I can tell you, it's tied, Susan can tell you, it's tied to the COVID money that came out of the Department of Education at the national level. So you have to elect a president in 2024 that's going to turn this stuff off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I would like there to be a public document, a letter where he answers my question to say, I'm sorry, there is no such law or legal authority that I have.
And I mean, if he wants to be honest, he could say, yeah, we're just doing it so we can get the money, but which he's never going to say that. So, but I would like there to be some sort of a document.
So what you can do is make a complaint if your opposition to the vax is based on religious beliefs, and put the information that we currently know, which is that there is no approved vaccination in the United States. They're all emergency use authorizations. Those have to be voluntary. You can't force somebody to participate in a medical experiment. And it's all correct. But they got money, $412 million of some SEL money. That same COVID funding has other things tied to it. Do you remember, I think Jimmy Carter was the president, and the speed limits got reduced to 55 miles an hour. Do you know why? Highway funds required that the speed limit be reduced to 55 miles an hour. They wanted highway funds, they reduced the speed limit to 55 miles an hour. So it's important who you vote for in Congress and for president on the national level, because they send the money with the strings.
So do I file a complaint with the Civil Rights Compliance Branch?
Correct.
Okay.
And tell them you can't force participation. And what they'll say is, no, the Pfizer vax is approved. Well, there is a Pfizer vax that got approved, but it's not available in the United States. So that's not the one we're talking about.
All right, the questions are good. We're going to have to wrap up, and I just want to give a quick warning in a hilarious kind of sense that you guys better download these PowerPoints now, because Susan and Jim will tell you that it's like an automobile. They change the minute they drive off the lot. So I'm only going to have them open and active for 1 week, and then I'm going to turn it off. Also, because you guys brought up vaccination, the YouTube gods are probably going to ban this video. So hopefully, people will get to watch it. No, that's okay. I'm just saying that this may be one of those things that you got to jump on board now and get it while it's hot. So anyway, we want to thank each and every one of you for coming tonight. You could have gone anywhere else. You could have done anything else, but you decided to come here and listen to Susan and listen to Jim, and we appreciate that. Please, if you do not get the Hawaii Family Forum notices, please sign up at HawaiiFamilyForum.org. There's a QR code outside that you can just sign up right there if you want to. But stay plugged in, because we're going to continue to do these, and every time we do it, you're going to have new information. So mahalo again to Kalihi Union. And can we get a round of applause for the tech crew that was working so hard? Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys. In my other life, I do technology stuff too, so I'm so glad that tonight it's not me, it's them. But anyway, we also thank Pastor Jonathan, of course, and Shirley for all of her work inside. So mahalo, everybody. May you have we'll do the standard blessing as you go. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he surround you with his love and protection. May he hold you in the palm of his hand, and may he walk with you every step of the way. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Mahalo, everybody.